you. Because these lunch and learns, they're completely optional and they may or may not work with everyone's schedule, but we do have employees that like to watch the content after. So thank you for recording it for us. So welcome everyone. Let me see. Yes, welcome. So thanks for joining us for what we know will be another incredible and engaging conversation and learning experience for all of us. The Department of Human Resources, Personnel, and Civil Service is engaged in an ongoing effort to support and nurture a diverse and inclusive workforce and develop Suffolk County as an organization and place where people prefer to live, work, play, learn, and raise families for generations to come. We know that our employees are some of the best in the county, or as many of you have heard me say, rock stars. And our hope is that you get to learn more about each other through this programming and employee engagement activities to come. I'd like to thank our personnel officer, Tom Melito, for his leadership. And we are especially grateful to our county executive, Steve Ballone, for his inspirational vision to make Suffolk County the employer of choice. I am Retha Fernandez. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve the county as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Happy Pride Month. This month offers us the opportunity to celebrate and support the LGBTQ+ community, which you will learn all about today, and I'm excited for the program. I'll now turn it over to Paul Martinez, who is our talent acquisition lead for the county, to introduce our special guest. Paul?
Thank you so much, Retha, for everything. And I am so happy to be able to introduce Robert Vitelli. Robert is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for the LGBT Network. As the EVP and COO at LGBT Network, Robert leads and manages the design, delivery, evaluation, and funding of more than 30 programs and services for the LGBT community of Long Island and Queens. He has more than 25 years worth of experience advocating for LGBT inclusion and equity. And for the last 2 decades, he has led and developed various programs and initiatives to advance the LGBT diversity initiatives. Robert earned his master's degree from NYU and his bachelor's degree from Manhattan College. You know, this tells you a little bit about him, but he is that and so much more. And I really do believe that today is going to be just such a tremendous event. And I'm so grateful for Robert being here today. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you both so much, Retha, Paul, thank you so much. I really appreciate this invitation. I appreciate your partnership. And Paul, thank you to you. And you've been a volunteer with our workplace initiative really since its inception. So thank you so very, very much for all of your help. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Pride Month. My name is Robert Vitelli and I'm from LGBT Network. I'm going to share my screen. We are going to go with a PowerPoint today. I did have it teed up, but of course I hit something incorrectly on my screen. So I'm going to start the slideshow in a second. But before we get started, I just want to say more than anything, not only how happy I am to be here, but also, you know, this is intended to be a help for anyone that attends. This is supposed to be a safe space to ask questions and get information. In a usual pre-COVID year, we deliver about 600 of these programs, 300 of them actually in schools, and many of them, a growing number in workplaces just like this. So it's really very, very exciting. So we are LGBT Network. Our tagline, be yourself, stay healthy, change the world. This is me, Robert Vitelli. I use he, him as my pronouns. And this is my email address. If you'd ever like to reach out to me, please feel free. So a couple of things that we're going to do today. And let me say this, sometimes I talk a little fast. So if I go too fast and you'd like me to repeat something, unmute yourself and please, you know, give me a shout out. That's great. We really encourage participation. This is interactive. If you prefer to use the chat, we encourage that as well. While you're not talking, if you could please mute yourself, that would be really, really terrific. Oops, something's out of order. Number one, we're going to talk about LGBT Network very quickly. I'm going to tell you a little bit. Sorry. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the LGBT network. We're going to go through our LGBT 101 for the workplace program, and then we're going to talk about the experiences of LGBT employees, and we're going to touch on our LGBT workplace blueprint. We're probably not going to have time for that, but we are going to touch upon it. Now, again, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat. If you want to unmute yourself, that's fine too. I'm going to actually open up the chat window on my screen just to make sure I have it open and ready to go. We love questions. Okay, about LGBT Network very quickly. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are a home and a voice for the LGBT community, their families and support systems in Long Island and Queens. Our community centers help LGBT people to be themselves, stay healthy, and change the world. And this organization, established in 1993, now a lot of folks on this call may know this organization already, and you may have known us as our original name, which was Long Island Gay and Lesbian Youth, or the acronym pronounced as Legally. And I see Suffolk County DSS is on this call too, and we have a partnership with them, so thank you so much. I'm unsure about the other agencies represented today, but we do have a lot of relationships and a significant, wonderful history with Suffolk County and government, so thank you to everyone for that support. So when this organization started as Long Island Gay and Lesbian Youth in 1993, since that time, we've been pioneering advocacy and social change to create safer spaces where LGBT people live, learn, work, play, and pray. And clearly today we're talking about work. Where are we? Well, number one, our Hop Hog Center. This is our flagship 15,000 square feet point of information. It is the nation's largest suburban LGBT center. We also have a center in Sag Harbor. Those are our two Suffolk County locations currently. We also have a center in Astoria, Queens. Now the future, what's coming online, again, it's up in Suffolk County, our Bayshore Center and housing. That's the picture of it. 72 units of LGBT-friendly, affordable senior housing, anchored by a new 8,000 square foot community center. And we'd like, of course, to thank Suffolk County because they were involved in helping to move this project forward. And we're so grateful also to our county executive, Steve Ballone, for his support. And then hopefully we're going to get back to Nassau County as well. So if you'd like to learn more, lgbtnetwork.org, please check us out. So before I really start our LGBT 101, one of the things that I feel is really important to share is this LGBT 101 is literally how this organization began. It began with delivering this program in schools, which was like a secretive mission at the time back in 1993. But we've been doing it for 28 years. It is a tried and true curriculum. I tell people, you know, it's amazing. This is how we started with the organization, is doing this work and delivering our training, but it really hasn't changed that much. Sure, we've updated it, but the core elements are still there. And sometimes people are like, but Robert, like, you know, you got to update it. Yes, we have, but no, we can't really change it too much because it's actually still needed. And that's kind of a crazy thought. After 28 years, the core elements and the education points in our training are still needed, but we also know they still work. Also, yes, we're professional, but we also try to have fun. We understand that this can feel a little heavy to folks, and it's not intended to. You know, this is supposed to be a safe space. You know, people get nervous about asking questions. We welcome questions. This is the opportunity to do that. I love the questions. Housekeeping item. Using the chat, you can send me a direct message. So if you don't want to see, or you don't want to share your kind of question or thought with everyone, shoot me a private message. I won't blow up your spot. I won't say, say your name when you send me a private message. And that's really important. Actually, I did one of these yesterday, and a lot of people use that function, and it was really helpful. But again, this is a safe space to learn and ask questions. So please do. Okay, so some people might think, do I really need LGBT education? Do we need this? Maybe, maybe not. For some folks, this is a primer, and for other folks, it's a refresher. And we acknowledge, everyone is at a different place in their learning and their understanding and their knowledge when it comes to LGBT people and LGBT, as I say, stuff. One of the important concepts, though, that I like to share with people is that understanding informs implementation. So, we're going to start off, we're going to talk about sexual orientation, we're going to talk about gender identity, we're going to talk about all these different terms that you've probably heard and may not know, what they mean. And that's important because you have to understand those items in order to do, quote unquote, the work. And I hope that that's going to make sense as we go. But I just want to highlight that because as we start going, you might think, why are we going over this? Because understanding informs implementation. This is LGBT 101 for the workplace. Okay, if you have a question, please drop it in the chat. It's kind of a new term. I love it. Drop it in the chat. Okay, we're going to start off we're going to brainstorm. This is our interactive activity. You know, you can use the chat, you can call out whatever you'd like to do. We have two columns. We have a column for gay men and we have a column for lesbian women. Now I'm going to give you a scenario. This is not intended to be politically correct. Okay, it's not intended to be politically correct. Let me say, you know, just emphasize that. I want you to imagine you're somewhere where there's a lot of people, let's say pre-COVID. You're at a sporting event, you're at the mall, you're waiting for your friends. There's a lot of people. You start people watching, right? Very natural. And maybe don't think about yourself, maybe think about someone else. That could be easier. I want you to imagine that someone sees a guy or that someone sees a woman. And when they see the guy, they think to themselves, that guy's gay. Or when they see a woman, they're like, oh, she's a lesbian. I can tell. What I want you to do, what I'm asking you is to, for our list, we're going to make a very quick list, 3 or 4 items for each column. What is it that makes someone think that a guy is gay or that a woman is a lesbian? This is not intended to be politically correct. What are those things? You can shout them out. You can put them in the chat. Clothing, great. You just have, would you tell me a column for gay men or lesbian women? Thanks for kicking us off, by the way.
I would say haircut, how they look, and the body language.
Okay, hair. So is that for a gay, like for a lesbian woman? What is the haircut like?
Okay, it would usually be an undercut or a boy hairstyle.
Okay.
And the clothing would be more masculine. For the gay man, you know, showing feminine body language, usually sleek, clean cut, very put together.
Great. Okay, so for lesbian women, and that's something we always hear, okay, you got the short hair, excellent. Now, and I see it in the chat and you said it too. So whenever we use the terms masculine and feminine, we always kind of pause and ask people to say, you know, tell me exactly what you mean, only because we all might have a different definition of what masculine and feminine means, especially in today's world, but that's definitely evolved a lot more than ever has before. So if we said a gay guy is feminine, what does that mean? Like, what is it that a guy would do that you might, or someone might consider feminine?
Definitely hand movement, eye movement, and sometimes the way he speaks.
Okay. Great. How does he speak?
In a softer, and here again I will say feminine, in a softer feminine tone.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much. And we got clothes. Someone said clothing for gay men. What is the clothing for a guy like that someone might think a guy is gay?
Ooh, short shorts. Some colors. Some gay guys like to wear bold colors, pinks, purple, that sort of thing. And, you know, maybe colors of the rainbow.
Colors of the rainbow, right?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much. You're so active and vocal. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, so we said, you know, a couple of different things. We said for gay men, you know, we said the higher voice, clean, well-dressed. There are a couple of those things for women. You know, we heard the short hair. We heard, you know, we always get kind of baggy clothes. So what is this, Alyssa? What are we talking about? I mean, I didn't type the list.
What we're seeing, or what people look like, or, you know, basically what they look like.
We got it in the chat. Thank you so much, Rita. Yeah, stereotypes, right? This is a list of stereotypes, right? So we talk about, can you tell? That's really a question here. We talk about clothes, walk, haircuts, makeup, voice, right? All these different things. And that's really important, right? So it is a list of stereotypes. Now, here's the next question, though, because we're talking about can you tell? So what is when we say stereotype, what does the word stereotype mean? Like, what is the definition of stereotyping? Because then the next question is, what has to happen in order for a stereotype to be true? I forgot to play my game show music at these moments. So, all right, so let me lead you forward then. Okay, so number one, okay, let me go backwards. What? Too fast. Okay, a stereotype, we're saying everyone in that group is that way, right? That's one thing that we say. The other thing is that we say, if someone has one of those traits or characteristics, then they must be part of that group, right? Those are the two things that we say. Oh, everyone in that group is the same way. And if you have those traits or characteristics as part of that group, then you must be a part of that group, right? So what it would have to happen in order for any stereotype to be true? Insert game show music. All right, I'll tell you. Number one, everyone in that group would have to be that same exact way. In order for a stereotype to be true, everybody in that group would have to be that way, right? What's the other thing? Two. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for answering that in the chat. Everyone would have to be the same, right? And then number two is, if someone is that way, then they are part of that group, right? Those are the only ways that that could be true. So are all gay men and lesbian women like that, right? Or do all gay men have a high, pitched voice, or all men, clean and good looking? We get a lot of those things all the time. Are there? Yes. Are there gay or men that don't have any of those traits or characteristics? Yes. Are there straight or heterosexual men that have all or some of those traits or characteristics? Yes. Are there lesbian women who have short hair and baggy clothes and have the keychain with the chain? Yes. Are there lesbian women who don't have short hair and don't have the keychain and don't wear flannel shirts? Yes. Are there straight or heterosexual women that might have all those traits or characteristics? Yes. And so the point here is that you cannot tell what someone's sexual orientation is just by looking at them or seeing how they talk or how they walk, right? You can't tell. What is the only way that you could tell or know what someone's sexual orientation is?
By them telling you themselves.
They tell you, right? Excellent,
Yes.
right? Perfect, excellent. And that can happen in different ways, right? So, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But let me say this: someone's not just be like, "Hey, my name's Robert, I'm gay." But if we're talking and we get to know each other and we talk about, did you see that new movie? And I say, oh, my husband and I just saw this movie. That's me coming out. That's me saying, hey, I'm gay. So no, you cannot tell what someone's sexual orientation is just by looking at them, seeing how they talk, how they walk. Some LGBT people think that they have gaydar, that they can tell. That's not true. They cannot tell. Don't let anyone tell you that. They'll try, and that's not true. And that's very, very important. You cannot tell what someone's sexual orientation is. Okay, so I keep using the term sexual orientation. There's another term sometimes that people use. Does anyone have heard another term that people have used?
Sexuality, gender identity, gender expression.
Yeah, well, thank you. And those are a lot of terms, and we're going to get to, I think, most of those. There's another term that people frequently use in place of sexual orientation, and it is sexual preference. So the question here, and this is going to be our first poll question today, first of three. All right, I have launched a poll. The question is, do sexual orientation and sexual preference as terms, do they mean the same thing? Do these two terms mean the same thing? Insert game show music. I actually have organ music. I'm not going to play it. So take a minute or so to answer that question. So this is how we're going to talk about it. Okay. Think about what you could do on the weekend, right? You've had a long week. You're tired. You decide on Friday night, you're just going to stay home and relax, right? And watch TV. Can you do that? Sure. You can stay home, kick up your feet, watch TV. Great. Catch up on Real Housewives or something. Then on Saturday, you say, oh, it's such a beautiful day. I want to go to the beach and lay out in the sun. Can you do that? Yeah, you can do that. You can go to the beach and do anything you want. You can go on the beach, lay in the sun, get a hot dog, great. The next day you wake up and you say, well, today I'm gay or lesbian. Can you do that? The next day, now we're on to Monday. The next day you wake up and you say, today, it's a nice day out. Today I'm going to be straight. Today I'm going to be a heterosexual. Can you do that? Can you wake up one day and say, I'm going to be gay or lesbian? Can you wake up the next day and say, hey, I'm straight or heterosexual? So the answer is no, you cannot. And really talking about why. So number one, with our poll results, we're going to end the poll and we'll share those results. 94% said no, they don't mean the same thing. 6% said yes, they do mean the same thing. So the answer is no, they don't mean the same thing. Why? Sexual orientation is a way that you are. It's a way that you feel. When we talk about when someone is emotionally, spiritually, or physically attracted to someone else, that's what we're talking about. When someone is emotionally, physically, and spiritually attracted to someone else, there's a way that you are, there's a way that you feel. We're going to take we're going to step a little bit deeper into that too. some items in the chat. Sexual orientation is how you see yourself. Sexual preference is what their preference is. So we're going to define that a little bit more in a second. So thank you. Sexual preference can be interpreted on what someone prefers, like bisexual or pansexual. We're going to talk about that too. So sexual orientation defined. That's a great segue. So thank you for your comments. It's a way that you are. It's a way that you feel. It's about who you fall in love with, right? That's what sexual orientation is. It really is about who you fall in love with and who you are attracted to. Some of the terms that we do avoid is preference or choice, right? Because it says like, oh, well, you choose to be gay or lesbian, or it's like, do you choose to be heterosexual? And the answer is no, no one chooses to be who they are. Now, sometimes we think people choose, right? Because someone comes out later in life. And we've all known either someone, or we know someone who knows someone where they married someone of the opposite sex, they had kids, they've been together for 20, 30, 40 years, and then they come out later in life, right? So did they turn gay or lesbian? No. They were always gay or lesbian, but they were afraid to be out, right? And unfortunately, it is a story I would imagine probably most of us are familiar with. And hopefully that story is something that we hear less and less as time goes by, where people do feel more supported and feel more comfortable and safer to come out, so that they are not, they're avoiding doing things to actually disprove who they are, because that is actually what happens. So the other term is lifestyle. Sometimes people, when we're talking about the LGBT community, will use the term lifestyle, which for the most part is received as insulting, because what it infers is, again, it infers choice, but it also tries to suggest that being an LGBT person is something different than someone else. Like, oh, that lifestyle, like there's no lifestyle. And sometimes people think, oh, the gay lifestyle, it sounds very opulent. It's not, because there's really nothing different. A lifestyle is like if you eat healthy or work out every day. It's not being an LGBT person. So that's an important distinction. So why don't we use the term sexual preference? Let's think about those weekend options, right? Staying home, going to the beach. We could do any of those. But we don't have a menu. Like you choose what you can do and when you want to do it. There is no sexual orientation menu. You don't get a chance to choose who you are and how you feel and who you're attracted to, right? That is the difference. And that's why sexual preference is not the right term. Now, some common identities, and thank you for putting this in the chat, right? We talked to someone put in the chat about bisexual or pansexual. And that was a direct message to me, in case you're wondering why you can't see it. So thank you so much for putting that out there. So some common sexual orientations, we say common because there are a couple that we go with, the ones that most people know. So number one, heterosexual means when someone is emotionally, spiritually, and physically attracted to someone of the blank gender. Heterosexual means when someone is emotionally, spiritually, and physically attracted, just to make sure you're all paying attention, to someone of the blank gender. Opposite. Okay, I gave you that one. That's fine. Next is lesbian and gay. We sometimes use the term homosexual. It means when someone is emotionally, spiritually, and physically attracted to someone of the blank gender.
Same gender.
There you go. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, next. Bisexual. It means when someone is emotionally, spiritually, and physically attracted to someone of blank gender.
Both genders.
Both. All right. Woo. Thank you. All right, now here we go. Now this is going to throw you, and it's supposed to. Pansexual. Does anyone, first of all, folks have heard of this term. Not everyone, right? But folks are starting to understand, or I shouldn't say understand, because that's the problem, is people are hearing the term, but they actually don't know what it means. Someone put in the chat to me a direct message, thank you. It's regardless of gender, and that is absolutely correct. So sexual orientation, if you look at heterosexual, lesbian, or gay and bisexual, sexual orientation is defined upon someone's gender and the gender of the person that they are attracted to. I'm going to say that again. Sexual orientation is defined by someone's gender and the gender of someone that they are attracted to, right? So if I'm homosexual, it means I'm a guy that's attracted to another guy. If I'm heterosexual, it means I'm a man that's attracted to a woman. If I'm bisexual, it means I could be either gender, but I'm attracted to both genders. And that's the key thing. Bisexual is sexual orientation is a social construction. And what it says is that you have to be this gender or that gender, right? So it assumes that someone identifies on the binary of gender as either a man or a woman. That's what it assumes. Not everyone, and this is what we're going to learn today, if you don't know it already, not everyone identifies as a man or a woman exclusively. So if I don't identify as a man or a woman, mostly you're talking about someone who is non-binary. Non-binary means I don't identify as either a man or a woman, either all or some of the time. If I don't identify as either a man or a woman, how can we define my sexual orientation? Pansexual acknowledges that not everyone identifies on the gender binary, and so for themselves and for people that they are attracted to, that they may not be identified on that gender binary. So pansexual, people might say, well, how is pansexual different from bisexual? Pansexual acknowledges that I'm attracted to someone regardless of their gender identity. Someone also asked me a question: is gender neutral okay? Gender, if the question is, is gender neutral the same thing as non-binary? I'm gonna say I'm not sure. And that's an important acknowledgement. There is an evolution of this terminology right now in our community, and the understanding of it, and the acknowledgement also that some people define things a little bit differently. I have not heard people identify as gender neutral. I've heard people frequently use the term gender neutral to talk about like a gender neutral restroom, although a lot of people say all gender restrooms, so that's important too. So, but not as an identity. As an identity, if someone doesn't identify as either a man or a woman, either all or some of the time, they do most often use the term non-binary, or at least that's my personal experience. So thank you for asking that question. All right, next. Woo, so much information. Okay, so sometimes we're talking about sexual orientation, we're talking about, well, when did you know you were straight? This is a great question. I love asking this question. And I love it because the answers are always the same. I ask for a volunteer, no one raises their hand. I say, oh, everyone here is homosexual. People very quickly raise their hands. We identify, we ask one person who is openly heterosexual. I say that obviously with a grin, to volunteer. So we ask the question, we say, okay, do you remember your first crush? And they always smirk, and they usually say like their name, like right away, Johnny, kindergarten. Like, whoa, I didn't even ask you that question yet, right? Because it comes back to us. And I'm like, okay, let me ask you a couple of questions. And he say, okay, so, Johnny, kindergarten, right? Yes. Okay, how did you know you liked Johnny? Oh my God, Johnny was so cute. I really liked him. I got butterflies. We would hold hands together sometimes. I'm like, okay, great, adorable. So you, in kindergarten with Johnny, you knew that you liked him. Yes. Okay. So in kindergarten, did you know that the word heterosexual described who you were and how you felt? Person looks at you. No, definitely. I didn't even know what that word was. Okay. But you knew that you liked Johnny. Yes. Okay. And in kindergarten, did you know who you want to have sex with? And the person always says, oh, God, no, of course not. I'm like, okay, right. Great. Thank you so much. Everyone always answers these questions the same way, including if they're an LGBT person. That no matter who you are, no matter what your sexual orientation or what your gender identity is, someone knows from a very, very young age who they are and how they feel. They know who they like. They know what it feels like. They don't know the word that describes it, right? They know it, at that age, it's certainly not about sex. And that's an important distinction, because with LGBT people, people like to sexually objectify the LGBT community and think that it's all about sex. It's not. And there's a difference. And that's why I want to put out, if you want to throw it out in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, what is the difference though from a heterosexual kid or an LGBT kid? What is the difference when they're growing up?
I would say the difference is one is allowed to be their authentic self, while the other many times is suppressed and not allowed to live their authentic self because of society.
That's great. Oh, thank you so much. That was so wonderful and beautiful and on point. I love your use of the word authentic, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. Someone to really just be them and have the freedom to be themselves, and and often feeling oppressed, right? And so then what I just put on the screen is people who are not heterosexual have to come out all the time. And so now we're going to segue into why, right? Because that's what we're talking about. So you know who you are, you know how you feel, but now you know that you shouldn't feel that way, right? So those messages that we get in our lives and that are still out there. I still don't hear a song on the radio sung by a guy singing about how he's in love with another guy, right? And that keeps happening. So what is this term? people know like the term homophobia, and you probably figure out biphobia, right? It's irrational fear about negative feelings about people who are lesbian, gay, or bisexual, right? So that's, most people know that other term. This is a term, heterosexism. This is probably a newer term to folks. Some folks may know it. I would imagine most folks don't know it. So what is heterosexism? Heterosexism is the, is the societal assumption that everyone is or ought to be heterosexual. Oh, that's a lot to take in. Like, what does that mean? Oh my gosh, it's a lot. It's the assumption that everyone is or ought to be heterosexual. So here's a great example. Telling a boy all the girls must be crazy about him. You know, I talk about Real Housewives, obviously I watch a lot of reality TV. I watch X Factor, so good. So X Factor UK, I think it was Nicole Schlesinger from the Pussycat Dolls. And it's, this nice looking young guy, he sings, he does great. She, it's her turn to judge, and she says, oh my God, it was so good, blah, blah, blah. And all the girls out there just must be going crazy for you. And she does it over and over again. And that is heterosexism. It's heterosexism because it assumes that it's saying and making normalizing that only girls would be attracted to him. And the omission that someone other than a girl could be attracted to him is heterosexism. And it says that only girls should be attracted to boys. That's the other element to that. This is the way it should be, as opposed to saying, oh, I bet you have like so many fans out there, right? Which is like a very gender neutral way to put it. That's the difference. And so that reinforcement that only girls should like boys, that is just a very, I think, clean example of what heterosexism is. And then actually someone referenced when I was talking about the love song thing, the only song they can think of is Same Love by Macklemore. Yes, which is such an amazing song and like acknowledging like those challenges for LGBT people, but still don't have a song by an LGBT person singing about someone that they love. Like, that's what I'm looking for. Or when I used to go to the hockey game, well, I used to not go, now I go, because they changed it when they do the screen, the kiss cam, and they would feature, go on couple and they kiss and they kiss, and then what they used to do, they stopped, is they would then put two players from the opposing team on the screen, and then everyone in the stadium would laugh, right? Because it's funny, why would two guys be kissing? And literally stigmatizing the affection and or the thought of two men being able to show that type of romantic affection for each other in front of a stadium of thousands of people. Another, unfortunately, good example of heterosexism. They have stopped doing that, which is very good, because I also I refused to go to the games for a little while, to my husband's chagrin, who is a hockey fan. But they changed it, so I go, because I was like, that's very uncomfortable. All right, so then we're going to go to our next poll question. Okay, poll question number 2. Here we go. Now we're shifting from sexual orientation to gender identity, and we're going to kick that off by saying, now, does the term sexual orientation mean the same thing as the term gender identity? Does the term sexual orientation mean the same thing as gender identity? And this is great because I know there were a couple of shout outs before, and gender identity was one of those terms. So this is great timing for us to be able to answer this question. I'll give folks a minute for everyone to respond to the poll, because everyone's just actively thinking about it. I know you're thinking about it. You're going to answer. Let's do a countdown, 5 seconds to respond to the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Organ music is ending. I'm ending the poll. Great. All right. So we said 100% of the folks said no, they are not the same thing. Okay, great. That is true. They're not the same thing. So what are we talking about? So from sexual orientation to gender identity. Sexual orientation is not gender identity. Sexual orientation refers to who you fall in love with, right? Gender identity refers to who you fall in love as. That's one of the ways that we talk about it, right? It's not the only way. I also like to point out, I should have said in the beginning, this is a session that we cover a lot in. However, it's not all inclusive. It is not an absolute. So I just want to make that very clear, because you could say, oh, that's, I have another way of defining it. Yes, absolutely. And this is an important distinction. So we're going to do a deeper dive and start to go through these layers of gender identity. So first, sex versus gender. And when we use the word sex here, we're not talking about the act of sex, we're talking about sex as a noun. And so sometimes we talk about sex assigned at birth, which we're going to go through. So we're talking about sex as a noun, or we're talking about someone's biology, right? We're talking about someone's born with a penis or someone's born with a vagina. And really the term that we use is assigned at birth. What is someone's sex assigned at birth? Okay, that's when we're talking about sex that we're talking about. And we talk about gender as a social construction and really based on societal norms at that time. All right, so that's sex versus gender. Next layer. And this is the next poll question. So the question is, does your sex assigned at birth define your gender identity? Does your sex assigned at birth define your gender identity? Game show music, game show music. We're going to go about 5 more seconds. Aretha, I have to find disco game show music. That's what I really have to show. Well, although it's all a little disco-y. All right, I'm going to end the poll and we're going to answer our question. Here sharing the results. Does your sex assigned at birth define your gender identity? 97% said no, 3% said yes. So the answer is no, it does not. Now, it's a little bit of a trick question the way it's phrased, so I want to acknowledge it. Are we talking about your own or not? So it could have been in alignment with your sex assigned at birth could have been in alignment with your gender identity. So but I think we all get the point here. So when we're talking about sex and gender, these are some of the terms that people use, and so we need to define them. So sex terms for sex assigned at birth, male, female, intersex. Intersex is when someone is born with both either partially or fully developed reproductive systems or tissue of both a biological male and a biological female. And you see me, I'm putting that in air quotes purposefully. And intersex births account for about 0.00004% of all births. So it's very small, but it's still something that is common enough that enough people experience that. Gender terms, we have man, woman, and then we have non-binary. Non-binary is when someone identifies either as doesn't identify as a man or a woman either all or some of the time. All or some of the time. That's the term non-binary. You talk about, it's very binary. It's talking about man or woman. It's an either or, as opposed to non-binary, which is I don't identify as a man or a woman exclusively. Okay. Now you'll note that there are more than 2 categories under each of these. Neither sex nor gender is an either or situation. Okay, so that's just an important acknowledgement. You might say like, oh, wait, we added these things. Well, I mean, I didn't add them. But that is the realities of people's experiences. And that's one of the ways we talk about it, right? And again, it's not an absolute, it's the realities of people's experiences. So that poll answer, does your sex assigned at birth define your gender identity? And the answer is no. Ultimately, it does not. And that's why I start to use the term alignment. Because we're talking about someone's sex assigned at birth doesn't really align with their gender identity, and meaning, is that the way that someone feels? Deeper dive. Okay, what is gender identity? Robert, you keep using this word and this term. It's someone's understanding of their own gender, regardless of their sex assigned at birth, right? Because there are people who are born with a penis, who do identify as boy or man, people who are born with a vagina, and they definitely identify as a girl or a woman. And there are people who are born sex assigned at birth, male, female, who do not identify as a man or woman. So for example, if someone is born with a penis, they don't identify as a boy or a man. If someone is born with a vagina, they don't always identify as a woman or a girl. Now you could say, well, but most of the time, okay, yes. But there is a growing number of people who seek more flexibility with how they identify, and they do not feel that identifying exclusively as a man or woman, or ever as a man and a woman, is something that fits them. There are also people who very distinctly say, I am the opposite of what I, quote unquote, what people think I should be, right? So those are kind of 2 different things, which I want to kind of delve into as we continue to define these things. All right, so let's talk about some terms. First, we're going to do binary and non-binary. So binary is 2 opposing options. We talked about male, female, man, woman. See, where it's already a little review because we touched on these. So when someone identifies on the binary, they're identifying as a man or a woman. Non-binary, it's more fluid, it's more than two options. Intersex, gender non-conforming are two terms that are also used. Now, when someone does not identify on the binary or is non-binary, they do not identify exclusively as a man or woman. And so that can be a little confusing for folks. So we say that because of the flexibility, that we understand folks to have, would like to have, that they sometimes could identify as our man or woman, but sometimes they don't. So sometimes we use the term gender fluid. And there are a lot of different terms. We're not going to cover all the terms. You don't have to remember all the terms. There is no quiz on the terms. But to understand that I think the overarching point is people are seeking more flexibility and they are expressing themselves with more flexibility than ever before with respect to their gender. But there's kind of two different ways that happens. Okay, so some common terms. So the first one here is transgender. So trans as a prefix means crossing, moving, shifting, going across. Gender identity does not align with someone's sex assigned at birth. So transgender ultimately means someone whose gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth. All right, so what does it mean when someone's gender identity does align with their sex assigned at birth? What's that word? That's cisgender. That's on the side of, or not moving, or not shifting, right? So gender identity does align with someone's sex assigned at birth. So most people in our world, I'm going to put that in air quotes, as we may know them or experience them, are cisgender. So I'm a cisgender man. That means, like, when you look at me, I present as a quote unquote man, and you're probably going to use he or him pronouns for me too. So let's practice with these terms. Okay, this is the quiz part a little bit. There isn't, you can get 100, but you don't have to get 100. It's okay. So we're going to do two samples first, because this is where it gets complicated. So we're going to use these terms to understand things. So at the top, we have sex, which is really sex assigned at birth. Then we have gender, and then we have gender identity. Now, it can be a little confusing, but let's just go with it. So if someone's sex assigned at birth is male, and they identify as a man, what is their gender identity? They are a cis man or cisgender man. Okay, so I would be considered a cisgender man. Next, if someone is born female, sex assigned at birth, and they identify as a man, they would be considered a trans or transgender man, right? That's trans man, right? And you'll note here, this is the hint. Gender is really what is defining someone's gender identity, not their sex assigned at birth. Next, okay, this is the quiz. You ready? If someone is born female, sex assigned at birth, and they identify as a woman, what is their gender identity? Anyone?
Cis woman.
Oh, excellent. Yes. I want to affirm you. I know you sounded unsure. Yes, everyone's unsure when they answer it. Yes, you got it. All right, next one. If someone is male, sex assigned at birth, and they identify as a woman, what would be their gender identity?
A trans woman.
Yay, right. Excellent. So female, sex assigned at birth plus woman is cis woman because someone's sex assigned at birth aligns with their gender identity. Someone who's sex assigned at birth male, and identifies as a woman, they're a trans woman because their sex assigned at birth does not align with their gender identity. Excellent job. Woo! 100% on the quiz. Very, very nice. So that helps to bring some of these terms together, right? And one of the important things that I always want to point out is this, and this is kind of like a little bit of a weird thing. And it's a weird thing, I feel like, in our community because of the way people talk in general about these things. There are people who are in our community who are transgender, right? They are born that their sex assigned at birth does not align with their gender identity. And so they do things to present as the gender identity that they feel, right? So they are moving from one specific gender or gender identity to another. Well, they're not moving from a gender identity, that is not accurate, but to change or to make sure that other people understand them as that gender, right? So they're specifically seeking to be thought of a man or a woman. Very different from non-binary. And the reason I emphasize this is because a lot of times we use the term transgender and then we kind of lump a whole bunch of people together, when it's very important to understand why that's not really the right thing to do, because transgender people, as I just said, are seeking to be thought of, understood, and viewed as a specific gender. Someone who's non-binary is looking to kind of move away from that gender binary. They don't want to be exclusively known as a man or a woman because that's not the way that they feel. So that's a really, really important distinction. I think there's, it's something that I don't hear a lot of people talking about on this end in the LGBT world. So I like to emphasize that because that I think is an important distinction, to not kind of group everyone together because everyone's experiences are so different. And that's just 2 examples. Now there are a whole bunch of other terms. Woo! My God, Robert, it's a lot of words, Can be both or all, neither, none, or fluctuate. So a lot of these terms, again, it's a little bit of flexibility. We talked about non-binary. Sometimes it's hyphenated as NB, and sometimes it's just pronounced NB. There's gender non-conforming. Gender non-conforming, most of the time is we're talking about someone's gender expression, right? How they express themselves, not so much how they identify. However, in some instances, we have experienced people. I feel very weird saying that we've experienced people, like if I'm talking about someone who's an alien, people in this community who use gender nonconforming also as an identity. So it really depends. Gender fluid is really talking about someone's shifting in terms of how they express their gender. And maybe sometimes it could be even how they understand their gender and how they are expressing it. Two-spirit is a term used by Native American or Indigenous peoples to really talk about someone who was not identified with a specific gender. And I really don't do an excellent job of explaining that. So if someone actually knows more than me, I'm sorry. And then we have terms like bigender and agender, which is, again, additional terms to represent that people can feel a different way about their gender, that they can feel an either or approach to it, or just not associate with any gender, that gender is just not a thing, I put that in air quotes too, for them, right? That they just don't understand and align with gender at all. Okay, whew. Breather. Okay, now Q, and this is another question we get all the time. Robert, aren't you LGBTQ network? No, we're LGBT network. What's the Q for? So a lot of people use the Q to denote the word queer. Sometimes they use it for questioning. Most of the time, my experience is it's for queer. This is an important thing to go over because queer can be received differently by different folks in this community or outside the community. So, for a lot of the LGBT older adults that we serve, the word queer, they grew up with the word queer, being used to, insult them. It was hurled at them as really as a violent act. So they don't identify with that word. Conversely, there is a younger part of our community that uses the word all the time. It's reclaiming the word, it's empowerment. So there's a lot of different feelings about this word. Some people use it to describe the entire community all the time. They don't say LGBTQ, they just say queer community. So that's not something I identify with. However, for a lot of other people, that is something that they identify with. There's no right answer here. And so people say, why don't you have the Q? And we're like, we're always going to leave someone off. So we're just kind of ending here with the acknowledgement that we understand that it's not absolutely and all inclusive. Some folks use LGBTQ, some folks use LGBT+, some folks use LGBTQ+, then there's LGBTQIQ, there's LGBTQIA+. There's a lot. They're all great, wonderful. It's an act to be inclusive and to acknowledge, and that's the most important thing. But for this slide is definitely understanding queer could go either way. If you're curious about what term to use, we always say, be reflective to the language that that person's using. And if you're not sure, you can ask. There's nothing wrong with that. Say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know. Do you say LGBT? Do you say LGBTQ? Do you say queer? And that's okay. All right, now, when we're talking about gender identity, very important, we have to talk about pronouns. Everyone has a question about pronouns. Robert, what are these pronouns? They, them, I don't understand. That's why we're here. Perfect. So if you have a question, definitely put it in the chat as we go through this. We try to do this in the most simple way possible. Okay, pronouns help us learn more about someone's gender identity. In English, pronouns are usually gender specific, such as he, him, his. We consider those, again, in air quotes, masculine. He left his phone somewhere. She, her, hers, which we consider feminine. She left her phone. Now, there are also gender neutral pronouns that are often used for people who identify on the gender binary. This is on the gender binary. So singular, I'm sorry, for people who do not identify on the gender binary. Singular, they, them, theirs. Someone left their phone, or no pronouns and use that person's name. Carrie left Carrie's phone. And people say, oh, that's so confusing. And one of the things we've actually realized, and one of the things that we share is like, we do this already. There are actually many times where we use they as singular. They left their phone. That, we do it. We don't realize it. And so, but when we're trying to use it intentionally, it definitely, for a lot of folks, we hear it doesn't feel regular or normal. They have to really think about it. Someone sent me a message. The question is, do you use mix, capital M, lowercase x, as a gender neutral pronoun? So mix, in my understanding, is like a salutation. So you have like Mr. or Ms., Mrs. or Ms. or Miss. Mix would be in there as a gender neutral one. That's my understanding of what mix is. And so in sharing, I have the problem, I'll naturally use they, them, but to intentionally do it, I have to think about it. So one of my recommendations for folks when they're like, what do I do? What do I say? If you're not sure, just use they, them, or use their name. I do it because I want to avoid misgendering someone. So misgendering is the act of using the wrong pronouns for someone. And it can be really painful for someone, especially if someone's transgender, if they're non-binary, they probably spent, a good portion of their lives with the challenge of having to come out as a non-cisgender person. And that's a lot. And so it can be very painful for them and traumatizing and triggering. So I never want to do that. And so that's why I always kind of go with they, them, unless they've already shared their pronouns with me, or I just use their name. And so one of the best practices that we see is introducing yourself with your pronouns. You'll see in my Zoom box right here. It says Robert Vitelli, he, him. It says it on the side of my screen. In my virtual background too, it says he, him. So like I said before, I'm a cisgender guy, present as a guy. I've never been misgendered before. So why is it important for me? It's important for me because I take responsibility for our world, and that I need to make sure that it feels comfortable for anyone and everyone to clarify what their pronouns are, not just if they don't make sense. So that is why people do this. And I feel like that is such an important thing. I know a lot. I don't hear people talking about that even in our community. It's just like, you got to use pronouns. And I'm like, okay, people have to understand why it's important. People don't get it. We've all been raised in our world where it's a binary world. You're man, you're woman. If you look like this, then it's he, him, or she, her, feminine, masculine. Like, it's very rigid and set. And to unlearn that, it takes a little bit. It's not overnight, right? You're kind of shedding, X number of years that you've been alive of learning and being reinforced these things, right? So that's okay. And that's why it's important to be able to use those terms, like to introduce yourself with your pronouns, and to help create that safe space for other people to do the same thing, not just when it's the exception, right? So I would be, people might consider me the non-exception because of the way that I present. I look like a guy. Okay, great. Whew, I got a lot in there. Okay, so here is kind of the continuation of that thought. Why using pronouns are important. So the number one thing is it's respect. It's respect. You respect what someone else's gender identity is and the pronouns that they use. If you used the wrong one, you'd be upsetting. If I use the wrong pronoun for you, meaning anyone here, just like if someone used the wrong pronoun for me, you'd be like, hey, that's not my pronoun. When I used to teach human sexuality at Nassau Community College, which was just wonderful and a lot of fun. When we got this topic, and of course I had a lot of rapport with the students at that time, not that, oh, I'm such a great professor, but we worked together for a couple of weeks. And then when we came to this topic, I would purposefully misgender one of my cisgender students. And I would use the wrong pronoun for them. And the response was really interesting. And that was the teaching tool, which was like, they were like, well, why, professor, this is Jane Murphy. I'm calling Jane he. And Jane Murphy is like, why are you calling me he? Like, that's not my pronoun. She gets very upset, right? And then someone else in the class was like, professor, why you keep referring to Jane as he? She's a she. And that moment for someone to see and experience and feel what it's like to be misgendered, and just as a cisgender person, what it feels like when you have that privilege of never having to really ultimately worry about being misgendered, and what that's like for someone else. So being able to develop a sense of empathy for other folks when you're like, wow, yeah, that doesn't feel right. Oh God, I get it now. So I always share that story because I really think that that helps people. That privilege of not being misgendered. You know, I'm a cisgendered person. I have the privilege of going through life not having to worry about being misgendered. That's a privilege. That is a privilege. Misgendering is painful and harmful, and we've talked about that already. So, you know, we talked about in the beginning, oh, how'd you know, you were heterosexual, what was it like for you to come out as a heterosexual person? I mean, we kind of phrased the question a little bit differently. Here, the question is, when did you come out as a woman, right? Or when did you come out as a man? You might think, well, I never came out as a woman. I never came out as a man. Right. Probably because you're a cisgender person. And that's the point about the privilege. You never have to come out as, you're always just known as because of the way you present and the way that you feel. There's an alignment from your sex assigned at birth to your gender identity, to how you express yourself, to your clothing, and to your pronouns, right? There's like a kind of a string through it. And for a lot of folks, there's not a string through all of those things. And so we have some words for that. Okay, so a lot of times we talk about transphobia and phobia, homophobia, biphobia. It's the same thing, irrational fear of transgender people and the negative attitudes and feelings towards them. But there's another word. Now, this is probably a brand new word. It's a great word, though. It's cis-sexism. Ooh, I practice this word a lot. Cis-sexism. It's very hard for me to say. It's the societal assumption that everyone is or ought to be cisgender. That's what cis-sexism is. You might say, like, oh, what? Give me an example. Okay, assuming what restroom a person uses or should use is an example of cis-sexism. I say, hey, can you please tell me, I'm visiting your suite, your office, your workplace. And I say, can you please tell me where the restroom is? And they're like, oh, the men's room is down the hall. That's cis-sexism. Another example of cis-sexism is just having gendered restrooms. I found one of the trainings I did, it just had a picture of like the restroom signs. Like it shows the two doors. It's only two doors and the sign with next to them. And it's like, this is cis-sexism. And it's cis-sexism because it says there are only two genders and you should be one of them. And if you are not one of them, we do not have a place for you in our world, or at least to go to the bathroom. And so that is an important thing because again, it says this is the way that you should be. So I like those two examples, like that example of the restroom for cis-sexism. Gender reveal parties, very popular. Very, very popular. One of the things that I found a while ago, we were further developing our training. So this is not a statement from us. This is something that I saw someone else make a statement on. If you want to know someone's gender, ask them directly, not the technician or the doctor or the person carrying them. And I thought, ooh, that's a great point, because we do make this assumption that if you're in someone carrying you, and if you have a penis, that it's blue and you're a boy and you're masculine, etc., and vice versa if someone that baby has a vagina, right? So gender reveal parties actually they're not gender reveal parties. They're actually like sex assigned at birth parties, reveal parties. That's really what they are. But again, we draw a string through all of those things, right? Penis, blue, boy, man, masculine, through the whole thing. And that's not how everyone identifies. But cis-sexism implies that, yes, that's how you should identify. That's how it works. That's how it should be. Now, bringing this all together is the genderbread person. We love the genderbread person. Now, this is not proprietary document visual of LGBT Network. We have our branding on it, but this is something that we pulled from online. A lot of people do. It's put out there. There are different iterations of it. There's also a unicorn too. So this is one of them. We use this one because we feel like it does a good job of highlighting kind of the different areas of someone's sexuality and how they relate to each other. They do show them on a continuum, which is, I guess, binary to some extent. So that is the deficit of this model in particular. But we got a couple of different things. There's someone's gender identity, right? We're talking about man or woman. Gender queer is in there, right? So, but it is a continuum. Then there's gender expression, right? When I talk about gender non-conforming, we talk about the terms masculine and feminine. So androgynous is actually, when someone has a combination of both masculine and feminine traits or characteristics. Then we have the biological sex, or sex assigned at birth, male, female, intersex. And then we have sexual orientation, heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. And of course, there's no room on this one for pansexual, of course. And that's, again, there are limitations to all of these, but this is one way to kind of, bring all of these thoughts together. So I want to pause on that note So I want to see if anyone has any questions because we're going to shift gears. Anyone? Okay. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about, well, what are LGBT employees experiencing? I'm going to go pretty quick so we can wrap this up because I am looking at the time. Number one, 2/3 of LGBT employees heard anti-LGBT comments at work. 58% reported hearing derogatory comments about sexual orientation and gender identity in their workplaces. Nearly 2/3 of LGBT workers reported hearing lesbian and gay jokes from their coworkers, 43% bisexual jokes, and 40% transgender jokes. 59% of non-LGBTQ workers surveyed say they think it's unprofessional to talk about sexual orientation and gender identity in the workplace, even though by their own self-reporting, they regularly talk about these subjects through everyday conversations about spouses, families, and life outside of work. This is an example of heterosexism and cissexism, because if I say, oh, me and my wife and I did this, that's okay. But if I say my husband and I did this, that's not okay. That's the example. 35% of LGB respondents reported ever having been harassed at work. 15 to 43% of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender workers have experienced being fired, denied promotions, or harassed. 27% of transgender people who held or applied for a job in the last year reported being fired, not hired, or denied a promotion due to their gender identity. Unemployment rates among transgender people is 3 times higher than the national average. 23% fear they may not be offered development or advancement opportunities. Of closeted employees, 31% fear losing connections with coworkers. 46 respondents to a 2018 survey said they are not open at work about their LGBTQ status. 46%. Bullying, harassment, lack of talent, mobility, sense of community and friends, losing a job. These are the experiences of LGBT people at work. Some of the data, the 2018 survey is clearly more recent. Some of the other data is, a little bit more dated, but it still speaks to those challenges. 3 more things. Nearly 1 in 10 LGBT employees left a job because their environment was unwelcoming. More than half of LGBT workers hide their sexual orientation in the workplace. More than a third of LGBT employees lie about their personal lives at work because they're afraid. They don't want to lose their camaraderie, right? We spend a third of our lives at work. I mean, maybe less because work from home now, but still we spend a lot of time together. So for people to not be themselves takes a lot of work and energy. When they're worrying about that, it takes away from the energy that they can devote to doing a wonderful job at work, right? And that's the point. And also because we all know how much time it takes to recruit and hire people and onboard them and keep them. And then when someone leaves, you're like, oh. And there are a lot of folks that leave jobs because they don't feel safe. And that's an important acknowledgement. When we did our workplace summit a year and a half ago, our first big event, there was someone who worked for a financial services institution, and I even forget what they did, but they were like, what I do, I don't even care about what I do. It's about working at a place that supports me, like that. And it was like an earth-shattering comment, and it was very funny because he did his job because he loved the company. He loved the fact that he could be out and feel supported and safe, and it meant he could do anything. He really didn't even like what he did, and I think that really says a lot about what it can do to be out and feel safe and included at work. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop there because then what happens is we're going to talk about it. We're really out of time, but we do have a blueprint for folks, and that I'm going to pause right there. And I want to say thank you to everyone for participating. I want to thank everyone for the questions, the comments, and the shout outs. I want to thank Retha and Paul again, and our county executive, Steve Ballone. And I really give Suffolk County a lot of credit for doing this. This is, I think, it's a big deal. And I think it's a really significant step. And I really applaud you all for taking these steps together and moving, your DEI agenda forward. So thank you again. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And then I'm also going to put in the chat. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. Small technical difficulty. Just 2 links about LGBT Network and about our workplace initiative. So
could you also put your email in the chat if you're okay with that?
Yes. I just forgot that. Thank you. Whew.
Thank you, Robert. So appreciate this. I have a page full of notes, and I have learned a lot. And yeah, some of it was a reinforcement, but what especially stood out to me was the heterosexism that I do or have done to my son. All the girls are gonna love you. Look at those lashes. All the girls are gonna love you. So, so now I know. So I really appreciated this. And for everyone that's here and that were able to stay on, thank you for staying on. Thank you for joining. We hope that you did learn something. We hope that you feel empowered with information to help all of us make Suffolk County the employer of choice and make each of our buildings, departments more inclusive for everyone. So thank you. And thank you, Paul, for making that connection with us.
Thank you so much, Robert. It was just such an incredible presentation and brought a lot of things to light. And it's nice when you can have an environment where everybody's free to talk about things that they were not necessarily aware of. And it was good that you were here to answer questions. And it was good to have that experience that people do feel comfortable about asking those difficult questions. Thank you.
Yep.
It's my pleasure. We're so happy to be here. Please let us know anything else that you need. And if anyone needs anything from us as an organization, always feel free to reach out to us. We kind of do everything. So really anything that you need, we'll help you out with. And if anyone wants a training for their specific, for other folks that couldn't be here today, you reach out to us and we're here.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.
And happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride Month.
Same to you.
And thank you again, Rita and Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So I know some people don't, but Robert, when you get the recording, if you can send it to me so I can have our IT folks put it on our intranet.
That's my cue to stop recording.
Okay.